for us, culture is first and foremost, do you do good dentistry? Are you good? Because we can't change that no matter how much effort we put at the DSO level. 2 is, can we recruit and can we retain staff that's going to support you, not just today, but 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And then do we have strong cultural alignment with our core values? So if you look at our name, Core Dental, we actually had our core values ahead of our name.
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy the show, if you listen to the podcast, if you could leave a review, give it a star, subscribe, whatever the option is where you consume your podcasts, would very much appreciate it so that we can continue to bring valuable insights to the dental industry. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Len Schiavone, the CEO of CORDENTAL Group. With over 32 years of experience leading organizations across industries and a variety of healthcare verticals, Len brings a wealth of knowledge in driving business growth, implementing operational rigor, and driving innovation. CORDENTAL now operates in 9 states with more than 45 practices. Len, super excited to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show. Looking forward to doing this today.
Absolutely. Maybe to start, why don't you share with the audience a little bit more about CORDENTAL, what your focus is on, what type of specialties you cater to, and just a little story about the business.
So CORDENTAL was founded in 2017. We are predominantly focused on general practitioner dentistry, but we've also got 30% of our business is specialty, mainly pediatrics, some oral surgery, and some ortho. Mainly GP, and we are a Midwest-based organization. So we're probably in the part of the country that most would say are flyover states, mainly Iowa and Wisconsin, Illinois. We're excited to be there. We think it provides us a lot of additional stability and opportunity that maybe is overlooked when you think about some of the larger metro markets.
Now, I've looked into your background a bit, and I've saw that you've led organizations in ENT and allergy and some hospice, palliative care. This is your first organization in the dental space. It looks like you joined to run Core roughly 10 months to a year ago. Is about right?
September of last year, yeah. Heading right into the 9th month.
So first impressions of dental, what are your thoughts?
A lot of parallels to just general medical healthcare. You see the same challenges in revenue cycle. You see the same challenges in schedule attainment and the same challenges with how do you attract the patient that is, a non-referral patient. So a lot of the same challenges you see in medicine, you see strictly in dental as well. I think with a little bit different caveat, which is dentistry is more competitive. You really recognize that it's more of a consumer-led or consumer-driven business. And I think standing out is more challenging in dentistry than it is when you're in a subspecialty like renal care or in ENT, where, sure, there's other competitors in the market, but instead of having hundreds, you might have 20 or 30 competitors in a metro market. So you really have to focus on the really small details for patient acquisition and also patient retention. I heard a good one when I went to a conference recently. I think it stuck with me as a newbie into the dental industry is that my lost patient is your new patient. That's what you've got to think about dentistry is very transferable in terms of patients making decisions. So I think the organization's got to be wired around how to succeed there.
So great call out. I actually had not heard that before. When you all are thinking about growth, do you typically follow a de novo model? Are you looking for acquisitions? Are you just looking to grow within the offices that you currently have? What's your thought process on that?
I'd say primarily we're an organically growing organization that is focused on how do we maximize same-store sales or more sales out of our existing footprint? And that can be a tuck-in strategy or that can be added additional clinicians to the environment. Secondarily, we are an acquisitive organization and we're looking for additional practices that fit the segmentation and the cultural aspects of our current footprint. We're very disciplined. We're not going to step outside that. We know what works and we know what doesn't work, having been around for many years. And then lastly, I'd say we're de novo generated. That's not a big part of what we are because frankly, the return takes a long time to materialize. And if you get it wrong in a market, it's not the best use of our capital. So predominantly the first two are really where we're focused.
As part of the acquisition model, you just made a comment about wanting it to be a cultural fit or ensuring that that acquisition is going to align with goals and objectives of CORDENTAL. Can you explain what that means for your organization?
We've done enough acquisitions now and also have not been successful with some of those to know what works. And so for us, culture is first and foremost, do you do good dentistry? Are you good? Because we can't change that no matter how much effort we put at the DSO level. Two is, can we recruit and can we retain staff that's going to support you, not just today, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And then, do we have strong cultural alignment with our core values? So if you look at our name, CORDENTAL, we actually had our core values ahead of our name. And so if you look at our founder, Dana Soper and Stephen Jones, we knew that those three things, collaborate, optimize, and respect, what we were going to build the foundation around. And so if we find that a current owner doesn't respect their team or only looks at it through the lens of what's in it for me, we pass immediately. There has to be alignment there to say, we value our staff, we value our team, we recognize that they're providers too. We're able to retain that staff and we want to do great dentistry. And if we do those things well, sure, we can optimize around our revenue cycle, or we can optimize around the systems that we use, or we can optimize on how we market. But if the foundation's not there, we're going to walk every time. And it's pretty easy to find once you start having substantive discussions with the current ownership, and because they feel it too, right? They're looking for that same partnership. It's a pretty easy dynamic to really set that out in the first couple of meetings.
I like that the values are front and center all the time. I didn't realize that that was what the core of CORDENTAL stood for. I've only run into one other organization in dental that has done it in that way. It's Truck Dental out of Canada. Jan Jaffer was the founder, and I forget what the acronym Truck stands for, but it's also their values. I think it's a clever way of doing it. People talk about how do you ingrain values into an organization? Well, there's one way is every time that you speak about it, you are speaking about the values. How else do you think about ingraining values inside an organization?
I think the question that comes to mind is, how much as a DSO do you sort of think about how standardized you make your organization and what value does that bring? And I think we at CORE have always felt inside the clinical operation, what happens in the operatory or what happens with the staff is really led by our clinicians. That's not to say that we don't have clinical standards or that we don't have guidelines and protocols, but we're not going to interfere with how that dentist or that hygienist does his or her craft. But that's not to say that we won't help to optimize patient acquisition in our marketing or revenue cycle or how we schedule. Those things I think are wanted because most of our selling dentists realize we're pretty good, but we can be better. That's the O in CORE is the optimization piece of it. So we're really fairly hands-off on guiding our clinicians and our providers on how they practice dentistry and how they practice hygiene. That's not to say that we won't train them and give them best practices, but we give them a wide range of decisions. For example, if you think of a larger DSO, they might have 1 or 2 labs that they put everything through. We actually have, you can believe this, 12 preferred labs and almost 90 total labs that we deal with because we realize that not every market is the same. Rural Iowa is different than if I'm in Nashville. And so the needs are different and how they go to market are different. So I think with it, you build culture is you give some autonomy and you give some entrepreneurial spirit to the selling doctors and to the associate doctors that want to have the safety of a DSO, but at the same time, enough entrepreneurial spirit to build the practice the way that they want to build it. And so I think it's worked very well for CORE. And in fact, I've seen that work well in other subspecialties beyond dentistry where the doctor really is the brand and allows them to be the brand around things.
I think the appreciation of the nuances with the different markets as well probably builds credibility within those practices and with those doctors because it's a recognition of, okay, you see me, you understand what I'm trying to go through here. It's not a cookie cutter approach. I can see that being very important. And notice that you have quite a bit of experience working for private equity-backed companies. When you think about the demands of private equity and the goals to ensure that there's a return on the investment, to run a healthy business, oftentimes that optimization is a huge piece of that. What are some of the areas today with today's current climate and how the market is where you're really looking to dial things in?
It's an ever-emerging question. Well, so this is not one that I think I can give you just a quick, cogent answer. So I apologize. It's going to be a little bit lengthy. But when we look at it, there's a part of me that says we just need to do the basics better. And what I mean by the basics, we can learn a lot from medicine that hasn't yet matriculated over into dentistry. I think dentistry is still somewhat of a cottage industry when you think about it. Like everybody's sort of independent. I think change agility in dentistry is not quite as high as what you see in medicine. I don't mean that negatively. I mean it in terms of, I think dentists are well trained, but they get into a pattern of what works for them, and they're very somewhat resistant to changing to new ideas. So when I look at it, I say, look, the things that we can learn from medicine that transfer right over into dentistry are, one, schedule attainment is, to me, is one of the biggest areas. Overscheduling, overbooking, using true mathematics to say, we know what patient behavior is going to be like, and why can't we predict the future from the past? And we can. I think it's very useful if you work in a hospital environment or in a large medicine environment. They've already figured that stuff out, and it's time for dentists to do the same. Second is, there's always room for improved perio. There's improvements in hygiene. There's improvements in how we treat the patient completely. When you think about the ADA standards or whatnot, I think some of our practices do it really, really well, and some are still have room to really optimize that. The third I would say is treatment planning is highly variable depending on the dentist skill set. I think there's a ton of opportunity to make that more seamless. Every doctor's got to be cookie cutter. I mean, like how we optimize it, how we treat it, how we communicate it, how we bring access to that. It's no different than a good faith estimate when we do it in medicine, but there's more variability of how that actually gets communicated and gets digested by the patient. I think the big difference here is instead of medicine saying we're going to cover 90% of the cost and 10% comes from the patient, it's opposite. It's 20% comes from insurance and the other has to come from the patient. So it's even more critical that we get that right. And I think for me, when I say get back to the basics, those are all within our wheelhouse to optimize and improve. And I think the common element that brings us together is technology. When you look at it, dentistry's multiple flavors of how you get there. Whereas in healthcare, you hear the big ones. It's Epic, it's Cerner. There's big EMRs that are out there that have been there for years that tie into the hospitals and all the rest. And because it's so dependent on those referral systems. And so they've dialed that down. Whereas in dentistry, there's still a tremendous amount of flexibility. And I think AI is probably more important in dentistry than it is actually in healthcare and medicine, because there's more speed to market in dentistry because you can actually make more change quickly with direct to consumer or direct to patient than you can in healthcare. You don't have all the Stark laws and all the other pieces that are in there. So the speed to change is faster here. And I'm really excited to be able to bring some of the things that I've seen work well in medicine and at the same time innovate, because I think dentistry is probably going to innovate faster than medicine is here with AI. And you can see it already with like Overjet and some of the radiographic overreads and stuff. You're not seeing that yet in some of the medicine space that I came from because everything centers around the doctor's view of what they're seeing. I think the ability to change here is much faster and will have a much bigger impact on not only improvements in healthcare and the outcomes, but also on how the patient engages with the practice. So, sorry, long-winded answer. There's a tremendous ability to change here, and the barriers are not as high. You don't have to get the hospital aligned. You don't have to get the surgeon aligned. You don't have to get the compliance officer to align. There's far easier changes that can be made here in a pilot environment. And so dentistry is ripe to really change American healthcare.
Really great perspective and a lot that could be unpacked there. Going back, the first element that you brought up with the managing of the schedule and the challenge that practices face and doing that and the importance of keeping a schedule full and having some analysis on patient behavior and an understanding of what likely will or will not happen and how you manage that. Can you go into a little bit more detail on some of the approaches that you think would be beneficial? I had one guest on the podcast and he talked about that they would cancel an appointment on a patient if they weren't confirmed within 24 hours. So they had a sequence within which they followed. As long as that sequence was followed and there was the outreach made in various formats and the patient declined to do the courtesy of saying, yes, I will be there, they would cancel the appointment, book somebody else. And that was just kind of their process. And I've heard others that they hear that up in arms, like, no, that's going to create a terrible experience for folks. I'd just be interested in hearing your perspective on what approaches you think can bear fruit.
Well, to be transparent, we've tried both of those approaches, not only here in dentistry, but also in my prior life in medicine. And I think it depends on the temperament of the doctor and of the practice. Some folks are a little more upfront and say, hey, my time is worth the courtesy of a call or a validation that you're going to show up. And if you don't show, we're going to cancel. And even some in my prior life would go so far as to say, I'm going to charge you some nominal amount of money because you took up a slot that's worth, my time. Just the flip side of that is a lot of the dentists, and I think even my prior doctors would say, we're in medicine. We don't want to be that heavy-handed about it. There's reasons why life gets in the way, particularly when you're talking about Medicare and Medicaid patients as to why they can't make it. It could be transportation or whatever. So we've tried all those things, but where I've landed most recently over the last 5 or 6 years is we're not going to change patient behavior. Life gets in the way. They get ill, they feel better, they can't get their transportation figured out, they have a sick child, you name it, heard it all. And where I've landed most recently in the last 5 years is you can use the past to predict the future. And if you do that well enough with your predictive analytics, you realize what times of the day and what days of the week that they're not going to show up. Now, not down to the exact minute, but within hour blocks or within time ranges what that's going to happen. And you can simply overfill your schedule. And yes, every now and again, the lottery's not going to work in your favor and they're both going to show up, but it's not going to happen every single day of every single week. And you can make it easier on your team to do that. And we've built those algorithms here at CORDENTAL to be able to do that. We can see that by practice, by hygiene, by dentist, when we see the patterns happening on Monday morning or Tuesday afternoon, or even a Thursday afternoon. Why? What times is it happening and what kind of appointments are actually canceling? So that we can work our way backwards to say, you know what, this is a good place to put a +1 in the schedule. Make it easier on the dentist, make it easier on the team. And we don't always get it right, but at the same time, it's also not creating a fire drill. Len cancels 10 minutes before the appointment. Otherwise, you got somebody on deck already that you've already anticipated. So not an ideal way, but it's very common in surgical environments and also in medical environments to do that, because we realize that keeping a surgical team waiting is thousands of dollars versus, hundreds. And so I like to see that carry more into dentistry, because I think dentists don't value their time as much as a surgeon or a subspecialist. And the reality is their time's just as valuable as anybody else's.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. So you've built these algorithms internally or contracted to have somebody build them, or is it a specific technology that you've implemented that's more broadly commercially available?
We built them internally, and there's nothing magical about it. It's just statistics. This is something I brought from my prior life, not being in healthcare, where you can use data to do statistical analysis on it and say, what do you think? How many secure do you want to be in your confidence range? And you can build backwards from that. And it's frankly in every single practice management system that's out there, because you've got a schedule that you're managing every single day. You know when patients are canceling. As long as you have access to the data, you can see it. It's just trending it.
Yeah. So another comment that you made talks about that the ability for speed of change is there in the dental space. And I understand your perspective on that, and I don't disagree. I think that there's a lot of these different technologies that offer flexibility to tie into a multitude of systems, and that are, you mentioned Overjet, which is a great example of something where you can implement that across your organization, across multiple solutions, and really add value to your practices and your dentists. But I think that there's also, in some ways, because there's a feeling of autonomy and entrepreneurship, the implementation of new tools, new technology, new anything, sometimes there's a viewpoint that there's something that's good for the business. Like Len as CEO goes, here are things that would be good for us to add more value, to build more stability over time. It might not offer the same benefit at the individual practice level, to where the dentist is going like, yes, please, like implement that for me. Do you see any of that disconnect from like a change management perspective? How do you go about managing that when there's things that you feel are important to be implemented, but you get pushback at the individual practice level for not maybe appreciating the value?
Change is not a linear line. You have days where you gain ground and you have days where you lose ground. And I think, to your point you made a minute ago, the dentist or the hygienist has to feel like there's some value in either helping them in their day or helping the patient with a better outcome or a better visit. And I think clearly articulating the why it's important is certainly front and center. But at the same time, you have to meet the dentist or the hygienist of where they really are. And some are going to change far slower than I'd like to admit or even be patient with. And some are going to change much more quickly. What we find is you have to keep communicating the why. There's tons of studies that are out there that suggest that before somebody will even understand it or even begin to change, you've got to communicate 8.5 times. You've got to stay with the message and beyond message all the time of why it's important, how it helps the patient, their care, and how it helps the dentist or the hygienist. And to be fair, not all technologies do that. And there are just some that are good for the business, which are the reason why we want to invest in these is because it gives us the ability to reinvest in the business. So if we can optimize, as an example, our revenue cycle outreach to our patients, and it takes less manual labor to do that, that's just time back. That's less burden on the team and the practice to be able to do more productive things. So it's telling the why and staying after it and being patient. That change is going to take a little bit of time. And if you're willing to keep communicating and showing the benefit, and then when you're not getting the change that you want or desire, then breaking it down to the individual level to say, okay, we need to be meeting more frequently. We need to be talking about why this is not working in the practice. And I'll give you an example. When I joined back in September, we had about 9 of our practices that were really lagging behind on Overjet. And this is after a 1.5 years of training and helping and nurturing it along. And so we started having every other week 15-minute meetings. And what we found was it wasn't always resistance. There were things in the background that were just not optimized. Hey, it's too laggy when I put it in front of the patient, or it's not connecting in all my operatories, or I don't remember how to get to that, icon to put it in front, or I don't like how it's coding, and, just on and on and on. And so what we found was we had to create a little bit of a SWAT team that went in there and basically optimized each one of those 9. And I'm proud to say that today, after just a few months of work, they're equal to or even better than the practices that we baselined them against. And it's not always resistance. It's just being open to the idea of it's not working the way that I envisioned it. And can you make it better at the local practice? So yeah, it's change, but it's also being willing on the other side to say, not everything's cookie cutter. You have to adjust to where the practitioner is and how they use the tools to make them work. And so that's customization, a little bit of configuration, and a little bit of just problem solving. And once they know that you care, they're on board. So it's not a straight line oftentimes, but you've got to be patient and you got to be persistent.
What I also heard there is that you all took the time to understand what the root causes were. It's very common to hear somebody say, oh, this doesn't work, not good, or I don't like it. They're not actual reasons or causes for why something's not working, but it's the default fallback. And with your Tiger team that you created that kind of was in there and working closely with the practices, it also allows people to feel heard and understand. And your team learned from that as well. Just going back to Radiographic AI and Overjet, and not to, they're partners of ours, and not to make it an Overjet commercial, but what do you find the best benefit of Radiographic AI these days? Because very, very hot topic in the industry.
It's a great question. And I would say the most important thing that we've gotten out of it is, and I've said this to the AI folks, the Overjet folks, and I'm happy to say it again in front of them. But the main thing here is patient education. You can take something that is a grainy image that, frankly, somebody who's not clinically trained is going to say, I don't really see it or recognize it, and put some logic behind it when you see a red spark or a green spark line on there, or a purple shading where you can say it's right there. And it's akin to what I came from in ENT, where you can take the CAT scan and show the blockage or show the blockage in the ear and say, it's right there. And I think the most important piece of treatment is understanding. And I think when patients really understand what it is that you're trying to do to help their healthcare, they're more understanding and therefore more willing to hear the treatment plan and then internalize it with their family to say, is this the right decision for me? And Overjet, by far and away, with the ability to sort of brighten the image and then put I call them spark lines, it's the wrong word, but the patterns around the help to educate. That's how you get engagement up.
It was all boxes and lines when it first started. Now it's got much more sophisticated over the years. It's a trust builder. It creates credibility between the dentist and their patient, the doctor and their patient. And I always joke with people, my dentist doesn't use any radiographic AI. I'm the weird person that sits in their chair and starts drilling them about new dental technologies and are you doing this? What are you doing with Curidon? Are you using any radiographic? And they're like, who is this weird person that's sitting in my chair right now? But I wish that they did, because when I look at the images, I have no idea. It just is all shades of gray, and it doesn't really tell me much of the story. So I want to understand myself.
We've had patients who have said, we're glad that you use radiographic imagery or the overjet overlay, because they realize, hey, this is actually, I won't say cutting edge, but that's what comes to mind, is like, there's a level of additional confidence that's built that not only are you showing them what the treatment plan is outlining, but they can actually see it. And it's not just the dentist saying it, but now I've got another, call it opinion, that's coming up on the screen that is, confirming what I'm also seeing as a patient in the chair. So we've gotten a lot of great positive feedback, particularly from, folks that are a little bit younger and a little more tech savvy, saying, I'm glad my dentist has that in their system because I can see why that's an aid to my care.
No, absolutely. So you mentioned RCM a second ago. Do you guys do any centralized RCM services? Is RCM managed at the individual offices? How do you think about that decision?
It's a great question. And the answer is yes and yes. We're hybrid. We probably take a little bit different approach to RCM than most. I have found in my past life that centralizing RCM is, yes, you can save some costs, but you also lose in that as well, which is you're losing the patient communication, the touch, the exception management, the relationship, all the rest of that. So what we do is we take a bit of a hybrid role, which is for those practices that are doing a really effective job and the tools are there universally for all of our practices, we kind of say, just keep doing what you're doing. Time of service is good. Your questions are good. You're using the tools appropriately. The patients are responding, but don't mess with it. For those that are struggling, then we have a CBO team in the background that say, okay, anywhere from we can engage parts of the way or all the way to take it all the way over. And so we've got a number of our practices that are, on the larger side, just don't have time. We'll say, okay, central business office, you take it. It's not a mandatory, it's more performance-based. And those that need help, we provide that help. And for those that are doing a great job and can sustain that, we say it's properly placed in the practice. So we're a little bit of a hybrid. We do use some outside sources to help us where we get behind with collections, but it's not really our foundation. It's really probably half and half.
Now, you mentioned you lose a little bit of that patient touch when you centralize services. And I think one of the friction points that you find in dental practices is when the estimations are incorrect, the patient balance ends up being higher than was expected. You collected some amount for a procedure and then it didn't end up being accurate. So patient gets stuck with this remaining bill, which creates, just talked about building trust. That's an area where it creates distrust. I think just in dentistry in general, everyone challenged with this problem. How do you navigate that, or how do you coach your practices to navigate when that situation arises?
Well, let me back up a step, because I think we're putting our teams in a very difficult position to get it right, because you've got to have clarity of your insurances. You got to look at your markdowns and all the other pieces on a insurance by insurance situation. And so part of me has stepped back and said, well, how do we get better tools in their hands? Because nobody's coming in the morning wanting to do errant work or not provide the patient with the best, most accurate treatment plan that they possibly can. It's just really, really difficult to do it well. We've been working on some tools where we're trying to air-proof it, where we're saying, hey, if it's this insurance and it's this situation, the tool's already making the decision for you. So that way you can begin to improve the accuracy of the actual treatment plan specifically. Once you have that done, then the discussion becomes easier, because you're working with an accurate plan, and you can then humanize it in a way that relates to the patient. So that's job number one, is to get the treatment plan and the tools that our teams are using to the best situation that we can. And we've looked at all the ones that are in the industry right now, and there are some that do a better job of communicating the plan or can text the plan or whatever. But really, how do you actually create a very accurate plan is something that we've taken in-house to build ourselves. The second piece of that is, how do you train them to get the communication right? And how do you overcome objections? Because the patient's not fully understanding it. And that's really an area that we're just now starting to really work towards, which is, here's best demonstrated practices. Here's how you overcome objections. Here's the tools that you can use, like Sunbid or Care Credit, to overcome some of the financial challenges that the patient might have. And we're on that journey right now. I wish we could say that we've cracked it. I'm hoping to say that if you interview me by the end of the first quarter of next year, that we're in a much better position. Again, I think we can take a lot of lessons from medicine, because in the medicine world, you have a good faith estimate. And if it's a government patient, like a Medicare or Medicaid, and you're off more than 10%, you eat the cost. So there's a real desire to get that right. And I think the tool sets are better in the EMR environment in medicine, because you can adjudicate a claim and see it immediately, whereas in dentistry, you can't. And so there's a lot to be taken over into dentistry from that perspective. And I'm excited that we're developing those tools today. We're only probably 4 weeks into a pilot right now, but I'm encouraged to see where we're going to go. I think if you were to ask Pacific Dental or some of the folks that are further along on that question, they've already cracked that code because they're using their internal databases to actually build the treatment plan off of the database.
I think that makes sense. And I think people are doing that. I think there's still also a lot of eating remaining patient balances and adjusting off is taking place out there in the space.
I would say you're absolutely right about that. And because so much of it is fee for service on the patient side, it's a real opportunity to crack that code, and knowing what you're getting into and explaining that up front to the patient, getting the consents properly documented, getting that all to where the patient really fully understands what they're getting into and why it costs what it costs, is probably the most important piece out of the gate. You're still going to have AR risk. And in today's world, I've done a lot of research on this. Like, if you look at where most patients are today, credit card balances are at the highest they've been since 2006. The average balance is somewhere over $8,000. We're at $1.26 trillion in credit card debt as a nation. People are maxing out, and we need to do a better job of understanding why that is and help them on their journey.
I'm just curious, do you think any of it is tied to access to debt? Like, this is maybe a bit of a departure in the conversation, but there's a lot of this Klarna buy now, pay later approach that has shown up on every consumer good that you can imagine. And you can now finance over, there was a joke that it was implemented, I think, in DoorDash or something. And somebody's like, great, I can finance my Jimmy John's, my $12 Jimmy John's over the next 4 months and pay $3 a month. So there seems to be a little bit of this cultural shift where things are in front of everybody. How do you balance helping understand what the right approach to patient financing should be when you look at some of those numbers?
It's staggering. A good example, my wife took our car in to get service the other day, and I came home and I was looking at the invoice, and at the very top of the invoice is a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and it says, if you need financing to pay for your oil change. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're talking about $100 oil change and we're going to finance an oil change. But car dealerships are getting into it now. So I do think that you're right. There's a cultural shift on access to being able to use your phone to scan your credit card or whatever. So the reality is there. I think from our perspective, we just try to stay disciplined. We're going to use the access that we have, this unbid and care credit and a couple others that we use. We're going to offer that. We're going to let it be a patient decision. We're going to be disciplined about deposits that come up front before treatment. The basic things still work today, but that's not to say that there's not more ever increasing risk, because I do think that, I hate to say it, but American consumers are maxing out on just anything right now. And it's a shame because in dentistry in particular, I feel like the dentist comes to work with the attitude of, well, if I get paid, I use this up. If the treatment plan is $30,000 and I get paid $10,000 on it, I still made, a reasonable amount of money. And I'm thinking, no, you provided $30,000 worth of work. You should collect the other 20. But there's this cultural mind shift of, well, I got paid 10 and the crown cost me or whatever cost me a few $1,000s. And so I got paid enough. And I think there's a mental shift that we've got to realize. And that is, as a dentist or as care providers, that our work is worth more than what that patient's willing to pay. And you got to have that clarity up front going into the treatment before you even start.
I had Steve Bill from Smile Brands on. He made a comment at one point. He's like, I think some dentists would just like to work for free if they could. There's the altruistic element to it, which is they do a lot of charity work, and there's a lot of desire to do that and a lot of satisfaction found in going out and providing those services. I think is kind of this clash between the profit and purpose that people have a hard time rationalizing sometimes, which might play a part in that. The willingness to not necessarily feel like you should collect the remainder of what you're due for the procedure that you provided for a patient.
I think there's an altruistic side of every dentist, and I think that's why they got into the profession, which is fantastic. And I don't want to dampen that in any way. But I also think that we have a right. Our care that we provide is equally as important as you go into your primary care practitioner, or in my prior life, an allergist or an ENT that was going to do surgical work on you. There's not a patient that we would ever do surgery on that didn't pay at least their down deposit for the full amount, because we knew the insurance carrier was going to pay the rest. So very rarely did we not collect 99 or 98% of it. There might have been a small balance that we read off, but not a lot. And, that patient never thought twice about shorting the surgeon for their surgical skills. And yet at the same time, we're doing equally as amount of care It just happens to be in a different part of the face. I think sometimes we're just so consumer driven and we're so relational as dentists and as a DSO that we're worried about that relationship as opposed to that surgeon or that allergist doesn't have that same fear. Okay, my services are worth that. And I think it's how you talk about it. Patients they understand that.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, another question, there's dental insurance is unique and much different from what you get in medical insurance. I just saw recently, I believe it was Delta Dental, launch their own membership plan. That, of course, in the space, there's been a number of membership providers for quite some time that offer that. Do you have a viewpoint on membership plans, their value or lack of, as it relates to implementing into a dental organization?
We have a membership plan that we use. I won't say that we're very successful with it. I think it fits some of our patients' needs. If you're uninsured, it certainly helps to have something that can cover your cleanings and can cover your exams and that sort of thing. So we do use it, but at the same time, I look at it and I say, there's not a lot of value in it because so much of it's coming from the consumer or from the patient. I really wish that we would stop using the word insurance in dental industry because it's really not. It's more like a coupon or a partial insurance, or I'm not sure what the right words are, but it's definitely not insurance. And I think people get confused. And I think sometimes it brings maybe some of these things that we just talked about, why a dentist is willing to discount their work. I think because there's a misnomer of, well, I have insurance and you didn't cover it. And yet I can't afford it, but I have insurance, and it's this circular argument. And I think if we started to change the discussion around, it's not really insurance, it's really maintenance, or it's really a coupon, or it's really something else. And really the insurance is really out of your pocketbook. So how do we help you stay orally healthy? And at the same time, when those big procedures come up, that's where the care credits and the sunbits and the access to some of these plans matter. I think we have an obligation as dental industry to start talking about it as being insurance because people relate it to medical insurance, which is completely different, and they're not even close.
No, and the cost structure is so different that you would hope that folks would recognize when coming out of their paycheck is $42 versus $800, that, the availability of coverage for procedures is going to be dramatically less than what you would get if you were paying this other amount. But it is interesting. So, in the conversation, we've talked about some headwinds that the dental industry faces. It's very consumer driven. Consumers are under a lot of pressure right now. There's the challenges with insurance, there's challenges with reimbursements. What are some of the things that, you look at the space and you're bullish on? You go, you know what? There is still a lot of opportunity for growth here as well.
I'm bullish because I think there's still a ton of undiagnosed care that's out there. I'm bullish because if you look at the community, there's a shortage of hygiene. There's a shortage of great dentists that are out there. There is more care that needs to be delivered than what we can deliver right now in our industry. And I think that, to your point a minute ago, if you're a little bit altruistic and you really care about the patient, I hate to say it, but our lead times for hygiene are way too far out, not just for us, but across the industry. There's more care that needs to be delivered. And I think we are looking at differential ways to be able to deliver that care. I think you'll see a one day where you'll see DAs in certain states being able to do supragingival care. I think there's times where that may not be appropriate. At the same time, we've got to look at ways of innovating. I'm bullish on innovation that's coming. I think there's huge opportunities, not only on we talked about Overjet, but that same AI that's here today is going to revolutionize how we schedule patients, how we optimize our communication to our patients, how we even adjudicate a claim, and how on the receiving end of that, the insurance carrier is going to be able to pay that claim without having somebody in between and a human be able to do that. So I think dentistry in general, because it is a little more straightforward than some of the medical environment, is a primary area in trial and error, and I think innovation that's going to happen here first. And I think it's going to transfer into healthcare and basically transform healthcare because people are going to say, look what's happening over there. Why aren't we doing it over here? It's funny, I was talking to one of my ex-surgeons that I used to work with last Friday, and he's doing this national study on how to cure migraine headaches. And I was just staying in touch with her. And I said to her, Karen, what's going on with your systems? And she's already seeing some of the trends that we've already years and years and years been in dentistry. Key words that need to be on an adjudicated claim that are just now hitting into medicine. And dentistry's already been there for over a decade. So I think what I'm bullish about is this is an area we can innovate and it can go backwards right into the rest of healthcare And I think that dentists in particular, because of how they're wired with being consumer oriented, is the best place ever to try it. So I think America's right for healthcare change, and I think it starts in dentistry.
So it's interesting that you say that, because when I first came into the dental space, I think the notion from a lot of people is, well, dental is so far behind healthcare and X, Y, and Z and all these different reasons. And I brought that question up to Ben Walling, the CTO of Sage Dental, and he has a similar outlook to you, where he goes, you know what? I actually don't think dental is behind in many ways. Dental has an opportunity to lead here, and we can take advantage of these things in a way that healthcare cannot. So there is an opportunity for a bit of a shift in the mindset there as well, because folks do look at things, and I think it is driven predominantly by the autonomy that has existed in dental for so long, and the fragmentation, and that there's a viewpoint that as a result of that fragmentation, of the autonomy, and of the reluctance to change on the individual practice level, that some of that potential innovation was stifled. But I think we are seeing a shift now. I would agree with you on that perspective. And I'd be curious, you've mentioned AI a couple times, not only just from the radiographic piece, but in general, there's all these applications. What are some of the things that you anticipate AI being able to solve that are currently either pain points or repetitive or just challenges that it would be great to sweep out of the way?
Yeah, and this is going to sound like I'm anti-practice when I say these things. I am very sensitive to the fact that some of the things that we do in the practice today may not exist the same way in the future. But I look at it as that's an opportunity, not so much for labor reductions, although that may be necessary in some cases. It's really about how do you repurpose that labor to do the things that bring value to the patient. We talked about some of them already, like treatment planning, but I can also foresee a day, not in the very near future, where your concierge, picking up the phone isn't a human. It's a human-like voice that's saying, how can I help you to schedule today? And do it very consistently. You're already seeing it in revenue cycle, where things like thoughtful AI and others, where you're seeing bots that can reach in and scrape down the data and do an insurance verification, or can do a pre-D, without a lot of human intervention. Yeah, sure, you have to work the ones that don't come back clean, but the technology is already here today. You're seeing things like the AI overreads, but I think we're going to go beyond that. On the payer side, they're actually using Overjet to do just the opposite, which is, do I get a clean claim in, and do I need somebody to overread this claim before I pay it? So I think the back end of the office is ripe for, we're trialing a piece of software right now that I think is going to be great, where, you're able to see your electronic invoice on your phone, and you just hit the hyperlink or whatever, and you can make a payment on your schedule. You can make up your own payment schedule. I do think that you're seeing some of these things happening organically that will change how we do sort of the front and the back of the office, but I still think the care that's happening in the operatory is not really going to change that much, at least other than tool sets that can help to do better diagnostics. But the rest is still going to be happening with the dentist and the hygienist, chair side. But like I said, I think the comment you made a minute ago, I'm bullish, because to make these kind of changes in a medical environment is much more difficult, because you've got the chief medical officer, you've got the hospital's chief medical officer, you've got large ingrained systems, you've got the payer's got more control, like on and on and on. So you don't have to align as many stakeholders in the whole system. You can just align the patient, the dentist, entrepreneurial spirit, and you can go. So that fragmentation may actually work in our advantage.
So much more red tape in the medical space. But what I think is throwing some people for a loop now is it's almost hard to keep up with the amount of technological innovation that's taking place. And so I think folks start to become overwhelmed and not really understand where to put their focus. And a lot of what comes out now from AI, for lack of a better term, it's what should be a feature in a practice management solution. It's not necessarily like a standalone product or like a solution, and it likely won't become a viable business over time because it'll become commoditized and it's just serving like one specific thing that somebody's trying to solve for versus something a little bit more broad. And so when you look at technology, obviously you've been doing lots of evaluations of different solutions. How do you not get overwhelmed with all of the different options that are out there?
We have a joke around CORDENTAL. We call it the flavor of the week with technology, because you're right, it's changing so quickly. And I don't know that that's an appropriate term or not, but where we're parked is go to where your pain points are and look at technology as a solution at the pain point. If you've got a piece of your technology today that's working very adequately, it's not time. But As an example, we had an aged part of our technology stack that, we're still mailing out invoices and doing things a little bit more antiquated. And when we looked at it, we said, this really isn't patient focused. It's not a pain point that the patient's bringing up, but it's a pain point for our team. And how do we improve that? So we kind of look at it through the lens of today, tomorrow, and down the road. Today, what's the problem and what are the pain points and where can we optimize and do that smaller encapsulated pilot, realizing that technology is moving very quickly. The tomorrow piece is, where do you want to be a year out, 2 years out, or even 3 years out? And where do you think technology is going to take you? Overjet's a good example of that. And then the longer term, we'll just take a wait and see approach because technology, to your point, the tech stack is going to change so dramatically. And many of the pieces that are now fragmented will become part of the practice management system over the next 12, 18, 24 months. And then that's when you go ahead and upgrade to the next stages of, well, do I want to change out my entire practice management? Because there's so much more benefit to doing that. So I think we're taking it more in like time slices and where the pain is today. And of course, you got to be able to justify the ROI on it. And I think it's easier to do that in some areas right now than it is in others. But I'm firmly convinced that in the next probably 18 months, we're going to see a whole cycle of change that's going to happen in dentistry because the transformation is happening very, very quickly with some of the major players like a Denticon and a Dentrix and others where they're investing heavily and you're going to see it play out in just a smoother patient interface and a dental interface.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the managing the schedule piece, and we're about to launch an AI solution for that automatically rebooks and figures out where the gaps are and uses all the analytics that you do, but it's just powered on the back end by AI and then automates it so the staff doesn't have to have any involvement in that process. And, I think about some of the things that you mentioned related to, the phone calls and doing appointments and talking to an AI agent. You made a comment about not necessarily labor reduction. And I agree. I think it is more of a labor repurpose. There'll probably be some disruption overall, but probably in a good way, given some of the challenges that already exist in staffing practices effectively. But most of the things that we talk about, whether it's opening up envelopes and posting your ERAs, or whether it's picking up the phone and talking to a patient to try to reschedule, those are the things that people find joy in the practice for the most part. They would rather be talking to a patient in person and engaging in this way, or helping the dentist out or the hygiene out. And so I think it's going to hopefully result in overall increase in job satisfaction in the offices, because the remaining roles and what needs to be done are those that should hopefully fill you with joy. So we'll see if it turns out that way or not.
I think people get into healthcare for a reason, and that is they want to serve. And you're there for a particular reason. You didn't choose this course of whether you're in dentistry or another medicine background. It doesn't matter. You're there to serve. And I think people feel a deep connection to that. And when you're doing the mundane things like opening up the mail or posting invoices or doing ERAs, and you optimize that and you can spend that time engaging with the patient, adding real value, helping to build that relationship and do other things. It's a human connection. That's why people got into healthcare. And I don't care if you're front office, back office, or providing the care. I think everybody still shares that same passion. And I'm excited because in a way, we're going to decouple the things that use up all of our time so that we can bring time back to help patients get better care, have more time to have that right relationship and that right experience. And think about the time that you can spend explaining why that treatment plan is important versus doing all the other stuff. So I'm excited because I think dentistry really is right. And I mean this when I say it, having seen the other side of medicine for the last, 20 years, there's not as many barriers to get there. And I think once it's perfected here, it's going to be revolutionary for the rest of medicine.
Well said. Well, hey, Len, thank you so much for joining. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. It was great to have you on, and could have probably continued this conversation for another couple hours, but it was a really good time.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate all the support.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.